Hey everybody, so welcome to another review, and this time we'll be talking about John Ostrander's first 10 issues of 1987's Suicide Squad series. The ongoing lasted for about 67 issues, and this is just the first 10, and so it's still a very small percentage of that whole arc. I'll put a link in the description to the 1988 Deadshot miniseries that I reviewed over on Geekvolution with Dan Torrey, and I'll put a link to my Deadshot Bulletproof review in the description as well. Just because I may pull them in every now and then, just as a reference or to illustrate a point a little bit better. But I'm not sure, and it would just be helpful to have that as backup in case I start talking Deadshot and getting too far away from myself. Because he is still one of my all-time favorite comic book characters, and I read a lot of stuff like Suicide Squad for him specifically. Now, with classic runs, people often get this illusion in their head that every issue is gold. Because everyone and their mother tells me how great this run is, that means from issue 1 to issue 100, every little thing is going to be great and I'm going to love it. And if there's even the slightest problem I have with it, then this run was a complete letdown and completely overrated. And that's not the way it works. You go in and read stuff like Peter Davis' Hulk, Dennis O'Neill's Iron Man, Ostrander's Suicide Squad, Morrison's JLA, and there's always those couple of issues here and there where we're still establishing things. And the great thing about comic book storytelling is that we talk about them in the long term. That if you have a 100-issue run, it's not about every little issue that was weaker than the next one. Or every little issue that was better than how it started or how it ended. It's not about the individual, very specific highs and lows. It's about the run as a whole and what context it fits into, where it took the character overall, and talking about it in the long term, in the long run, as opposed to just very specific, almost as a monthly basis kind of reviews. So with that said, yes, John Ostrander's Suicide Squad is a classic run. That doesn't mean these first 10 issues are all perfect or all great. This is not a great batch. This is just okay stuff. And part of the reason it's just okay so far is because it's still set up. It's still Ostrander finding a voice and figuring out who these characters are for him just as much for the audience. We still don't have a consistent team. We've got Amanda Waller, we've got Rick Flagg, we've got Deadshot, Captain Boomerang, Enchantress, and we have Nightshade a little bit. We have Nemesis a little bit. We have Bronze Tiger in this, who's actually pretty much a mainstay. But here and there are characters that come in and come out. There's a crossover that happens in the middle of issue 9, so you have to kind of disregard some of the stuff that happens there. But there's still character progress and writing some characters in, other characters out. We still don't know who these people are, and I don't think Ostrander really knows who they are yet. You get to issue 8 and you get to issue 10, and that's where things really pick up. Issue 8 is told all from the perspective of one of the squad's psychiatrists, and he's going through the team individually and just talking about their psychological disorders and what they want, and that's where you get the setup for the Deadshot miniseries, as well as some of the character profiles for people like Captain Boomerang and why they're interesting or why they're worthy of being on the team. You get a little bit of stuff with the Enchantress and Bronze Tiger meeting up with Madame Xanadu, and we're kind of building them to a status quo. And we're trying to figure out what places do we want these characters to be in before we start pushing their buttons. We're trying to build a bit of stability here. And just given the nature of the team, given the nature of DC at the time period, it's kind of hard to do that right off the bat. But there's a very good attempt to do so. So again, there's not a lot of brilliance here just yet. It's mostly just set up. It's mostly just interesting stuff. One of my favorite things, though, just to get into the positive, is Luke McDonald does the art for these, and he is fantastic. Between this and his Iron Man stuff in the 80s, that guy was just on fire. He has some absolutely great panel structures, and great team moments, and he's one of those guys that can draw just conversation. He doesn't need every panel to be action driven in order to make the art feel right. He can stand just like 6 people standing in a room talking or yelling at each other, and it looks fantastic. So he's definitely a highlight. One of the things I'm really legitimately surprised by is by issue 10, I really love Rick Flagg. Deadshot's always been my favorite Suicide Squad character, and I was going in expecting to strengthen the love for that character. But I found out that I'm actually really, really enjoying Rick Flag, and he's actually a very close second in my Suicide Squad list of who the best characters are. Rick Flag is what if Captain America had Nick Fury's job his whole life, and the kind of pessimism that builds in a person. Someone that is who's all about the top-down morality, that has got this rule for what is the right, having to deal with the worst people ever, and having himself brought down because of them, and looking for direction in a group of people he can't even understand. You've got this great moment in issue 10 where Batman breaks into the Suicide Squad base under Belle Reve prison, and when he's doing that, the team is like struggling around trying to corner him, and they finally do, and they're able to make Batman stand down and return this evidence of the Suicide Squad. And Deadshot's like, incredible, we just made the high and mighty Batman back down. And then Flagg just goes off. Flagg says that that Batman is worth 10 of anyone on the Suicide Squad, including Deadshot and Boomerang, who are the most adept at fighting. He says that Batman's a man he would be proud to serve under, instead of being stuck with these absolutely repulsive human beings. And now, because of the nature of the circumstance, because of the nature of working for the Suicide Squad, Batman is now Rick Flagg's enemy. And he can't stand that, because he did all of that. He blackened himself in the eyes of his hero to protect people like Deadshot and Captain Boomerang. And this motivates him to be a better leader for them, for the squad, to shape them into who they into a more oiled machine. And at this point, it really solidifies Rick Flag as the leader, because before this he's kind of broody, because he's lost some teammates in the past. Waller doesn't really know if he's capable of leading. He's never shown her anything to kind of earn that title, and in that moment he does, because now he's got a reason, and that reason is very much ideal driven, but in a very skewed way. And it's interesting that Rick Flag is not the duty automaton that most people think he is. You watch stuff like Justice League Unlimited episode Task Force X, or you just hear the name Rick Flag, or you see his cameos in other shows and comics, and he's just very much like a no-nonsense soldier, and that's not his character. Rick Flag is actually a pretty tortured guy, a guy that doesn't really know what being completely engulfed by duty actually is. He doesn't really know what being the good little soldier is. He's good at his job, but he doesn't really understand it. He reminds me a lot more of 60s Captain America than it does anything else. And that Batman scene just really solidified him as a person. Deadshot gets a little bit less to do, though, because that's one of the bigger scenes for Rick, but Deadshot is still kind of just floating around, and he doesn't get more depth until the Deadshot miniseries, and they set that up with issue 8, so I have a feeling when I get to 11 through 20, Deadshot will become a bit more front and center. But he still has great moments. They still know who he is, because Deadshot's answer to everything is just, let's shoot it. Just every problem you could ever think of is, let's shoot it. And there's a great moment where, in the second or third issue, actually, where Belle Reve has got G. Gordon Godfrey in prison. So Darkseid sends his female Furies after him. So the Furies break in, they kick everyone's ass, and they just take Godfrey away. And in the middle of the siege on Belle Reve, Waller and Rick Flag call up all the squad members, and Deadshot's just sitting there in his cell, and they're on the computer screen or on the TV screen, they're like, Deadshot, we need you to help protect the base from Darkseid's female Furies. And Deadshot's like, well, I don't get paid for security, so you're on your own. And he just flicks a quarter and breaks the comm. It's hilarious. Deadshot is very much Wolverine in the way he's written in these issues. He's the guy in the background that's just really cool. And every time he speaks, it means something, and it's important, or it's just really funny stuff. So Deadshot's got his voice, he just doesn't have his direction quite yet. And Rick Flag, by the end of this, definitely has his direction. Braun Steiger less so. Braun Steiger is the other big mainstay of this team. And he's written sometimes as this very saged, wise martial artist warrior that's got a complete sense of the world and is always calm and is always in charge of his emotions. And then sometimes he's just written kind of pedestrian as just kind of a street level Iron Fist kind of character. And and they haven't married those two yet. Enchantress has got a little bit more of a direction now that she's sort of enslaved the Enchantress Diner, because there's the main woman whose name is Jane Moon, I think. And now she's got like a collar from Madame Xanadu that lets her bring out the Enchantress and then force her back in. But doing so would make her stronger, so they have to use her sparingly. So they've kind of put her in a status quo. Waller is definitely more set. Amanda Waller's got a backstory that's really interesting and really depressing, and I'm surprised no one's used it before. Essentially, what happens is that her son gets killed, her daughter is raped, and her father dies while trying to kill his daughter's rapist. And she's just completely left on her own, but she still goes by Mrs. Waller because she's still kind of married to her tragedy, and she uses the tragedy and anger to do things like the Suicide Squad. And she's got very much the same kind of death wish that all the other characters do. And then she keeps letting on that she hates her job, but in a lot of ways, it's more dangerous that she actually kind of enjoys it, because that's the only way to channel her frustrated feelings out into place. That she's not just pure evil, that she's kind of been led into this place, and she doesn't know how to get out. And I'm really surprised that even Arrow hasn't used that backstory, because just like Rick Flagg, she's not a duty automaton. She's not a blatant consequentialist ends justifies the means character. She's got a degree of conflicting nature to her that we don't see anywhere else. So those characters are still set in their ways. But then you got characters like Nemesis, you've got characters like Nightshade, and they don't really do much yet. They're more like plot devices, and the early issues do this thing of, we start the first half of issue as like a Mission Impossible kind of mission style briefing, and then they go and do the mission, and then everything gets fouled up, and then the book ends with them at each other's throats because they have conflicting personalities and they don't know how to work together yet. And a big part of the book is that the Suicide Squad has got a group of psychiatrists that look after them, that they analyze them and make sure they're mission ready, because they are really, really hard to control, bizarre people. So having a psychiatrist around and talking to the characters as they deal with some horrible things is a great way to create psychological profiles. And it's also a really great way for Ostrander to make profiles of these characters in his mind, because he's able to have the book analyze itself through those psychiatrists without making it seem too much like he's full of himself. Like it's very much him throwing ideas on a page and then seeing if they work within the book, and then afterwards it sort of finds some momentum because it has like a sense of the psychological identity for all of these characters. There's a little bit of politics here and there. There's a very interesting kind of Cold War story going here where, because at this point the Cold War is pretty much diffused, because it's 1987. We're getting really close to the end of everything, and we don't like straight up do Cold War Soviet Union stories, but we've got a lot of these stories where we're talking about the atrocious things the United States government has done in the world, just to like one up other countries. That we don't really symbolize democracy as much as we symbolize might makes right. And the Squad doing these missions don't really question it, but the reader does to a certain extent, and that's really interesting to get from the villainous perspective, that the bad guys are telling us why we can sometimes be the bad guys. I think that's interesting. This is also a really colorful book. It's not like overly darkly drawn. It's not overly darkly colored. It's not bashing you over the head with how serious it is. It's actually a legitimate comic book, a James Bond spy sort of adventure that eventually evolves into a psychological thriller. And it does a really good job of making sure it's set in the DC universe, that it's still a comic book world where this stuff is going on, and we aren't taking the material, or we aren't taking the universe more seriously than we ought to. And we're giving just the right amount of engrossness in the material while at the same time making it fantastical. And that's a great balance, and it's something that Ostrander's always been really good with, even in his Star Wars runs. So this is good stuff. It's not great. It's good. Issues 8 and 10 are really where this book gets interesting. Issue 9 is partly a crossover to the DC Millennium thing, and there's a little bit of character stuff that goes on there, but not too much, or at least not so much that it was done by itself as much as it was part of the crossover. So there's not really a need to go through that aside from like one character death. Everything else, though, issues 1 through 7 are just okay. They're kind of just Mission Impossible kind of stories for a while before you get to 8 and 10, where we really delve into the deeper issues here. So yeah, this is good stuff. I recommend reading it. I recommend checking it out, but I also recommend like sticking with the book for a while so you can see how it makes these things a little bit more serious now. It makes these things a little bit more interesting. And definitely read the Deadshot miniseries before you go into the next wave of issues, because that's going to be kind of helpful. The 1988 Deadshot miniseries, not the Bulletproof one. So thanks everybody for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, whether you agree or disagree. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, where I talk about anything and everything in 140 character bursts. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.